Hello, welcome back to the library. Today I don't so much have a collection of books for you as I have a collection of films. So today I will be talking about books which have been adapted into films. Not just any adaptations, but books, films, which in my opinion were very good, skillful, faithful adaptations of those books. As I think we all know, film and TV adaptations of stories can be quite tricky, and you can get it very, very wrong, and you can really disappoint fans. But then if you get it right, you can make a really beautiful piece of art. And I think the greatest adaptations are the ones where the film or the TV show could really stand alone as a beautiful piece of art without you necessarily having had to have read the story, or they make you now want to go and read the story because you just became so enchanted by that world that you need to now go and have the deeper, more detailed experience that the book would give you. So, these are films which I thought were well adapted. Okay, so we're going to start with one of my favourite books, and that is Atonement by Ian Mcewan. I saw this film first, and then years later I read the book, and I thought on reflection that the film was very faithful and certainly stood on its own, but also made me really intrigued about the book. And I think in the case of Atonement, it's faithful to not just the plot, not just the characters, but the tone, the mood. So a little bit about it. The film Atonement came out in 2007. It stars Keira Knightley and James McAvoy and Saoirse Ronan in, I think, her first role. I think this was her breakout role. And it was directed by Joe Wright. And those of you who have been fans of the library for a long time might recall that I also especially love the film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, which also stars Keira Knightley and is directed by Joe Wright. So I clearly have a preference for that combination of artists together. So Atonement is set in 3 time periods. It's in mid-30s England, and then England and France during the war, and then modern times, basically. So it's a look back, but a very complicated kind of look back, I guess. It's kind of a love story. It's mostly a love story. It's also a story about class. It's a story about truth and injustice, So it begins in 1935 in England, and Keira Knightley plays Cecilia, who is home from the holidays at university, and she's not doing very well in her studies. She's not super bright, but she's from a very upper class family, so to an extent she's privileged enough that not doing well at university won't really mean much to her. And she has a younger sister played by Saoirse Ronan, who is very enterprising in putting on plays and staging dramas, and who very much lives in her imagination. And they have a mother who's never really present because she's always suffering migraines. James McAvoy plays Robbie, who has been Cecilia's kind of constant companion throughout her life because he is the son of the groundskeeper at Cecilia's house. And his life has been different. He's not from privilege, but he is doing amazingly well in his studies. So there is this tension between Robbie and Cecilia. She's got this upper class lassitude, and he's really, pulled up by the bootstraps kind of guy. So on this particular summer break in 1935 at Cecilia's beautiful house in the country, Cecilia and Robbie are forced to kind of confront this incredibly uncomfortable but totally incontrovertible attraction between them. And it's difficult for them. They realize that they want to be together. And the younger sister, Bryony, I think is her name, Bryony, she witnesses something odd happen between them. Actually, a couple of odd things with Cecilia and Robbie. And her imagination starts to run wild, and she thinks something's happening that's more than what it is. It's very compelling, these things that happen, and you can sort of see why she would, as a sort of, I think, 8-year-old, be confused and not understand the things that goes on between adults. And then something really awful happens at the country house, and it just splinters all their lives forever. And Robbie eventually goes off to war, and it all sort of comes back to that one day that Cecilia and Robbie realized that they were deeply attracted to each other, and one young girl didn't understand what that meant. The film is so beautiful, and Ian Mcewan's writing is so beautiful and so evocative and so detailed, and I honestly just can't imagine a better adaptation. So if you haven't seen Atonement, please definitely put that on your list. Okay, my next recommendation is actually, I think, the very first time I saw a film, having already read the book, and thought that was great. That was a great adaptation. I think most of the time you're disappointed. This was the first time that I wasn't. And the film and the book is Memoirs of Acacia. Memoirs of Acacia is written by Arthur Golden, and it was a very popular novel. And the film came out in 2005, directed by Rob Marshall, and it stars some big names in Asian film. Zhang Ziyi, Ken Watanabe, Michelle Yeoh, and it also won a bunch of Academy Awards, so it's obviously not just me who thinks it's a good film. So it's about a young girl called Chiyo who lives in a little fishing village on the coast of Japan, and her parents are very poor, so they sell her and her sister in Gion in Kyoto, which is the main geisha area of Kyoto. I have actually been to Gion, incidentally. It's really a great place. And unfortunately, Chiyo, it's called an okiya, the place where, the sort of geisha house. And it's run by some women who are not very nice to her. And it houses a successful geisha called Hatsumomo, who is a really terrible person. She's like a very popular, beautiful geisha, and she feels, I think, threatened by Chiyo's beauty and Chiyo's potential to become a successful geisha, and so she does a lot of horrible things to Chiyo. I mean, Chiyo is basically an indentured servant, really, and she's there with another young girl called Pumpkin, who also wants or is being primed to become a geisha. And it's not a good life. It's not a good life for them. And the only real way to get out of it is to try to successfully become a geisha. Not everybody who gets sold into an okiya becomes a geisha. It's really up to one of the older women to take you on, and then at some point you need a patron. So Chiyo could become a permanent servant or slave to this okiya, just as likely as she could become a money-earning, successful geisha. And I'll leave it up to you to find out what happens. What's so compelling about the story, both the book and the film, is how incredibly detailed it is, how well researched it must have been. It's such a blistering, revealing insight. I knew really not a lot about the history of geishas and that particular culture in Japan, even though in school I studied Japanese for many years and I went to Japan for a little while. It's still one of these pieces of work that is so meticulously rendered that it tells you a story, but it teaches you a lot about history and loyalty and love, Japan, geishas. So the Academy Awards that it won were all for visual things, cinematography, costume design, I think maybe art direction. So it's a stunning film, and probably, I think it's a film that hasn't remained large in our cultural consciousness, so I think it would be good for it to be rediscovered. So go and see that one. The next film is one I think you might know. You might have seen it. you might have read the book, and that is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. So you'd probably have to be living under a rock not to know about this story. It stars, the movie stars Shailene Woodley and Ansel Elgort as two kind of starstruck teenagers. And they fall in love. And Shailene Woodley's character, Hazel Grace, she is really sick. She's had cancer, and she's still kind of fighting it. You know, she's been a sick kid. So her mum convinces her to go to this support group for, you know, kids who have had or have cancer. And that's where she meets Augustus, who has had cancer himself. And they just really get along like a house on fire. And having both been forced to confront their mortality, they really delve a lot of philosophical issues together, but then they also, you know, they talk like teenagers, they text like teenagers, they fall in love like teenagers. And they really, really love this one book, and they want to, it's a book that had some kind of unfinished business, so they really want to meet the author, who lives in the Netherlands. So it's this question of, you know, Hazel being really sick, is it going to be possible for them to go and do that? And also, is it wise for her to fall in love with this boy when she really doesn't know what kind of a future she has? So I guess it being called The Fault in Our Stars is a reference to the fact that had neither of them had cancer, they wouldn't have met, because they wouldn't have needed to go to this support group. But of course, that they met and fell in love is kind of a problem for people who've had cancer, or in Hazel's case, still have cancer. It could have gone horribly wrong, this film. And I think it's down to the acting. It's just very sensitively and smartly performed. So if you didn't get on the Fault in Our Stars bandwagon, you don't have to be a teenager to enjoy it. I think that you should seek it out. It shouldn't be too hard to find. And if you do, get some tissues ready. Happy viewing, and I hope you have a wonderful day or a wonderful evening.